Thanks, Phil. Welcome, everybody. So let's see what the W3C has cooking for us. Got to start it real quick because we have a lot to get through. So today what I want to talk about is what's going on with WCAG 2.2 and 3.0. We'll look at new success criteria in 2.2. We'll talk about some hot topics, and we will talk a little bit about rules for WCAG that are being developed. Then we will look for WCAG 3, we'll look at the new structure, and we'll speculate about what's coming up next, and we'll wrap up with questions. So my name is Wilco Fierce. I am the principal product owner of Axe Core and Excellenter for Deque systems in Europe. I am the project manager for WCAG 3 for the W3C, and I am the facilitator of the ACD task force. I am white male with long brown hair, and today I'm wearing my Accessibility AxeCon t-shirts. And with me today is my colleague and friend Melanie.
Thank you, Wilco. Greetings to everyone. It's an honor to speak with you all today. My name is Melanie Phillip. I've been with Deque for more than 11 years now, and I currently serve as Deque's Director of Services Methodology. And part of my work in that role has been working with the W3C's Accessibility Guidelines Working Group, or AGWAG, since about 2017. I also serve as Deque's Advisory Committee representative to the W3C. With less than an hour for this update on 2.2 and 3.0, I'm going to be covering WCAG 2.2 at a pretty high level. I'm going to start with a super short overview of the timeline of WCAG development over the years, and then a high-level look at each of the new success criterion coming in 2.2. So with that, let me dive in. Those of you who are newer to the world of WCAG might be surprised by how long it's been around. So I'm going to set the scene with a quick look at its timeline. The first version of WCAG was developed in the late 1990s, yes, the last century, and became a WCAG recommendation in 1999. Work soon commenced on WCAG 2.0, which was published about 9 years later in 2008. In 2018, 10 years after WCAG 2.0 was finalized, the version 2.1 was published. Almost immediately, work was started on 2.2, and we expect that to be finalized this spring. In parallel to all of the work on WCAG 2.1 and 2.2, there has been a massive reimagining of the WCAG framework underway in WCAG 3, which Wilco will talk about a little bit later. So what is new in 2.2? As I'm speaking to you today, WCAG 2.2 is currently in its second candidate recommendation phase. Without going into the details of the W3C process for publishing technical specifications, this means that WCAG 2.2 is oh so close to becoming a standard. We expect that it will be official later this spring. Having said that, it isn't done until it's done, which means it's possible there still could be some changes. There could be changes to success criterion, and certainly to understanding documents and techniques and such. So I do encourage you all to jump into it, take a look at it, get a feel for it, and provide feedback to the working group with questions and such. But so some of the highlights of the 2.2 features coming on board include 9 new success criterion, 2 at the single A level, 5 at double A, and 2 more at triple A. In addition, 1 existing success criterion is moving from double A down to single A, and that would be 247 focus visible. And lastly, we have a success criterion 411 parsing that is due to be removed completely from 2.2. So some pretty big changes in addition to just new success criterion. The new success criterion enhance guidance for, especially for 2 groups, people with cognitive disabilities and people with mobility disabilities. So on the cognitive accessibility front, we have 4 new success criterion. First up, we have consistent help at the single A level. Have you ever found yourself saying, "Help, I can't find help" on this website? Well, the purpose of consistent help is to make it easier for people to find the help that they need. This requirement states that when a help feature is available on more than one web page on the website, it must appear in the same relative location on each of those pages. So the types of help that are covered by this success criterion include things like a phone number, email, chatbot, or links to support documentation, contact forms, FAQs, and such. This will help people get the help that they need to complete their intended task. So this slide shows an example of some of the kinds of help that would be in scope for this success criterion. Contact us links in a header or a footer, company phone numbers, chatbot widgets, social media links, and so on. Next up, we have redundant entry, which is also a level A criteria. Our persona quote for this one is, "Don't make me enter, don't make me enter, the same info twice, the same info twice." Completing forms can be straining for some people, especially those with cognitive disabilities or motor disabilities. Some forms require you to input the same information more than once. For example, an address. This extra entry can be taxing and can lead to mistakes. Redundant entry requires that forms either avoid asking for the same information more than once or make it really easy to reuse data already entered. So this slide shows an example of a form you've likely seen on an e-commerce site where you've entered your shipping address and then it asks you to add your billing address. But instead of having to re-enter the same information twice, there's a checkbox there which allows you to indicate that your billing address is the same as your shipping address. That is an example of meeting redundant entry. So next up, we have 2 success criterion related to accessible authentication. One is AA and the other is at AAA. Here we're thinking about somebody who might say, "I have dyslexia. Typing second factor authentication codes by hand is very hard or impossible for me. When I can copy the code sent to my mobile device or better yet, just tap the code on my mobile device, I can successfully log in." Logging into a website or app can be a struggle. People forget passwords and transcribing authentication codes can be prone to error. So accessible authentication requires that authentication processes must not use cognitive tests, such as memorization, transcription, solving puzzles. A simple way to meet these SCs is by not blocking people's access to pasting words from a password management tool. So this is intended to help people with cognitive disabilities, including memory, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and more. So the AAA version is stricter than the AA version in that it doesn't allow certain exceptions that the AA version does, such as recognizing objects in common CAPTCHAs. So this slide shows 2 examples of how authentication can meet these requirements. The first one is an example of a 2-step verification method that does not rely on transcribing a code. The message says, "To keep your account safer, a notification has been sent to your phone. Tap yes on the notification to continue. No transcription required." The second is an example of a login form with inputs, username, and password. It also has a link for forgot password. The path to recover or create a new password must also conform to this success criterion. Next, we'll talk about success criteria to enhance mobility accessibility. First up, we have dragging movements, and this one is at level AA. Imagine the following frustration. "Ugh, I can't do this drag and drop. I need another way to do it." Drag and drop actions require a fairly precise motion and ability to keep pressure on a mouse button or a touch screen without accidentally releasing. This can be challenging for some folks with motor disabilities. And that is why dragging movements requires that drag and drop not be the only way to perform an action with a single pointer, like a mouse or a finger. Note that dragging movements is not about having a keyboard accessible way to do the same action. That's already required under 211 keyboard. This success criterion is about providing a non-dragging way to do something with a pointer, such as a mouse or a finger. So this slide shows an example of a color sorter called My Favorite Colors. The instructions say drag colors or select a color and use the up or down arrows to rearrange their order. In addition to dragging the tiles, they can be selected with a mouse or with a keyboard, and the buttons to the right of the stack can be used to move a color tile up or down the stack. Dragging not required. So focus not obscured is another pair of success criterion with both a AA and a AAA version. Persona quote here is, "Hey, stop hiding my keyboard focus." These two success criterion will help sighted users who use a keyboard to navigate a web page by making sure the focused element isn't hidden behind overlapping content. For example, sticky headers, cookie pop-ups, chat widgets, non-modal dialogues may cover up part of the page that has keyboard focus. The AA requirement says that at least part of the focused element must be visible, and at AAA, all of the focused element must be visible. So this slide shows an example of a cookie consent banner that covers up part of a web page footer. As one tabs to the links in the footer using a keyboard, some are partially hidden and some are completely hidden. Partially hidden links are permitted at AA, but the AAA version doesn't allow any part of that link to be hidden. Next, on to target size at AA. This requirement addresses a frustration many of us experience. I need buttons big enough so that I can press the right one. Activating a small button on a touch screen is a challenge for many people, but especially for people who struggle with fine motor skills. This is equally true when using a mouse or other pointer device. This success criterion sets a minimum size for the controls or a minimum amount of distance that they need to be spaced in order to reduce the chance of accidentally activating the wrong element. This new target size success criterion gives us a AA requirement based on 24 by 24 pixel height and width, which is a companion to the existing AAA requirement of 44 by 44 pixels added in WCAG 2.1. So this slide shows a few examples of content that would be in scope for this success criterion. One is a series of social media icon links in a horizontal row, often found in the footer of a website. Typically, those icons are already greater than 24 by 24 pixels, so no big change there. But next, below that, we can see some links stacked vertically in a website footer. Since their width should already be at least 24 pixels due to the link text size, the thing to think about here is the vertical spacing between each link. Additional space might be added in order to reach the 24 pixel vertical height. And similarly, navigation items in a vertical stack in a navigation submenu must be spaced vertically to achieve that 24 pixel vertical spacing. I will end our high-level tour of the new WCAG 2.2 success criterion with one that's considered at risk of being struck from WCAG 2.2, focus appearance at level AA. Related to focus not obscured, focus appearance requires, related to focus not obscured, we can imagine somebody saying, where in the world is my keyboard focused? So focus appearance requires a clearly visible focus indicator So to help sighted users who depend on the keyboard to navigate web pages. This goes beyond the existing 247 focus visible by defining a minimum size of the indicator and a minimum contrast with surrounding colors. It also goes beyond 144 non-text contrast by requiring a minimum size and a minimum contrast between the focused and the unfocused state. So there's a lot to think about there. Focus appearance is quite complex and math heavy, and additional research is going on right now to understand its understandability for implementation as well as consistency in testing results. The results of that research could lead to changes or potentially removal of this success criterion, and that's why it's marked at risk at this time. The understanding document for focus appearance helpfully has about 30 examples to help us understand it. I've taken a few of the most basic examples for this slide to illustrate some of the concepts. All 4 examples use dark blue buttons with white text on a white background. So we've got dark blue buttons with white text on a white background. In our first example, the focused button has a dark 1 pixel line offset outside of the button against the white background. So there's space between the button and the indicator, and it's a pretty classic example of a focus ring around an element. The next example shows dark blue buttons, but this time the focused button has a yellow ring inset inside the button. The yellow has good contrast against the blue, and it also has a 2 pixel thickness in order to meet the requirement for the size or area of the focus indicator. The third example has the focused button with a 3 pixel yellow line overset the button and underneath the text. Again, good contrast and adequate size for the indicator. And lastly, we have an example of a different approach for the focus indicator. We have the yellow indicator on the blue button, but this time it's all the way to the left side and is really thick. So all of these are simple examples of design solutions for focus appearance, but the understanding document provides many more examples of many more options and scenarios. So to wrap things up, I want to leave you with a couple of points to think about. There's no doubt that WCAG is complex, and that's complex with a capital C. Few sites meet WCAG 2.0 level AA today. 2.0, which has been around for 15 years. In fact, WebAIM's 4 years of automated scans of 1 million home pages shows that only about 3% of them pass the basic automated testing for WCAG 2. Ouch. In addition, there are almost 600 open issues in the WCAG GitHub concerning WCAG 2.0 and 2.1. And a good portion of those are asking for interpretations of how does WCAG apply to scenarios that we find on the web today. So it makes it challenging for people to consistently apply WCAG. And that complexity leads us to a few hot topics with respect to WCAG 2.2. As I mentioned earlier, focus appearance is at risk. It could be dropped due to its complexity. Its goal is worthy indeed, but many have commented that it is the most complex success criterion to date. And others have pointed out that browsers are really better suited to solve the problem of focus indicators for all people, not just folks that happen to be on a website that meets 2.2. Target size minimum has also been the subject of a lot of complicated conversation around defining and measuring target offset or target spacing concept in the success criterion. And over the last week, by far, the top generator of email lighting up our email for the working group has been dropping 411 parsing from WCAG. It's pretty much a done deal that it's going to be dropped from 2.2, but what to do with it in 2.0 and 2.1 and the impact on regulations, standards, and policies that point to those two versions is a pretty hot topic right now. Other SCs with outstanding questions include accessible authentication and focus not obscured. So while 2.2 is so very close to the finish line, there's still a few things that need to be done to get it over the finish line. And with that, I thank you for your attention on our high-level flyover of WCAG 2.2, and I will give the remainder of this AxCon presentation over to Wilco. Over to you, Wilco.
Thanks, Melanie. So speaking of interpretations of WCAG, one of the things that the W3C has been working on is something called ACT rules. These are rules to help with testing WCAG more consistently, as well as testing consistently how certain parts of ARIA work. So next slide, please. So the accessibility conformance testing, or ACT project, has been going on for a number of years, and the goal of it has been to improve the consistency between how test tools work, how experts test certain things. If you've been in the field for a while, you will have noticed that there are some differences here and there, and we are trying to solve them and make it a little bit easier to see who is doing what. And the way we're doing that is through standardized rules. These are non-normative documents that describe in great detail how to test certain things, and they come with a number of standardized accessibility test cases to show how certain things should work. And this, we're hoping, will minimize the interpretation differences that are out there. So we are working to try to solve some of these issues that the standards have had for a while. Next slide. So the way you can see these ACT rules is you've got your WCAG 2 structure with the principles, the guidelines, the success criteria. These are part of the normative document itself. These are required by WCAG and fixed. And then there's the techniques, which have been around pretty much from the start of WCAG 2, which tell content authors how to apply WCAG, how to make something conform to WCAG. But this newer approach is to write ACT rules, which in great detail tell testers how to make sure that something fits and really understand the nuances and details and figure out how to draw the lines when there's edge cases in WCAG. Next slide. So something that the ACT project has been doing is we have been trying to figure out how consistent test tools and methodologies are with the ACT rules. So we have so far published dozens of ACT rules, and we are now starting to track how these tools and methodologies, how consistent they are, and what rules they are consistent with. So we have 4 categories of what we've called implementers. These are manuals, such as the Trusted Tester program. There's semi-automated tools, where there's a combination of automated and some human input. DevTools has solutions for that. Then there's fully automated, which run inside pages, like Core does, like many other tools do. And then there are linters, which is the newest category that we've added, which is static code analysis. Right now we have 9 implementations of that, but we are hoping to add more as things go. This is all based on published information. So these vendors publish test results from the test cases they've run their solutions against, and based on what they return on the test cases, we can figure out how consistent they are and what rules they're consistent with. So this gives us some transparency about what different tools and test methodologies do, as well as how consistent they are with what the W3C intends to do. Oh. Next slide. So if you want to learn more, I did a talk about that on AxCon 2021, which you can find on tinyurl.com/axcon21-ACT. And there are more resources available on w3.org/wai/standards-guidelines/ACT/rules. There's also an about page, and you can find the implementations there. But let's move on to WCAG 3 now, because I imagine there's a lot to say there too. So WCAG version 3.0 has been in development for a number of years now, and there's the goal for WCAG 3. There's a number of them, but these are, I think the main ones is to make it easier to learn and understand the guidelines, to broaden support for different disability needs. I'll get into what that means a little bit more in a minute. To keep up with new technology, because WCAG 2, as Melanie said, it's kind of old at this point. It's been around for a while. And then to better reflect real-world accessibility. One of the difficulties with WCAG 2 is if you have even a single problem, even a small deviation in your color contrast, for example, means your page doesn't conform to WCAG. And that's the same way as if the page is terribly inaccessible. So we're trying to figure out a way to make WCAG 3 better reflect actual accessibility of pages. Looking at the structure of WCAG 3, this is something that is largely set at this point. There are a lot of similarities between 2.0 and 3.0. The principles that are in WCAG 2.0 are no longer there. They have been removed, but WCAG 3 still has guidelines. Unlike WCAG 2, which has success criteria, WCAG 3 has outcomes. The reason we've called them outcomes is to better focus on the end result. We're not so much worried about checking boxes. We care about the end result. How does it help a person? And then techniques and ACT rules, which I mentioned before, are now part of something called methods. So methods are used to meet outcomes. The WCAG 2 success criteria that are the non-interference requirements have been renamed to critical issues, and there's likely going to be a good deal more of them in WCAG 3. And then the levels have been renamed as opposed to A, AA, AAA. WCAG 3's levels are called bronze, silver, and gold. What's new this year? And this should come up in the next public draft that goes out, is that the sections in WCAG 3 have status levels. These levels are there solely to indicate how far along the W3C thinks these sections are. There's 5 of them. Not all of them will be in public drafts. There are placeholders, which is, we know this is temporary. There's exploratory work. This is very early stuff. This is not. These will be in the editor's draft, but they're not going to go into the public review drafts. Then there's the developing status, which is this stuff looks promising, but a lot of details need to be worked out. So please keep that in mind when you're reviewing. There's refining work. We think this is a good direction. This looks right. We need a lot more review on this. And then there's mature at that stage as things are. We think this is good. Right now, WCAG 3 is pretty much all in its exploratory stage. Some things are moving to developing. And so that's kind of where we're at today. Next slide. So one of the major topics this year has been the conformance options. There's WCAG 2's conformance model. There's some difficulties there. WCAG 2 is very strict on everything has to pass everywhere consistently. And we're trying to improve on that in a number of different ways. We're looking at, can we separate testable outcomes from qualitative outcomes, where things maybe not as hard and fixed? Can we maybe adjust the levels and maybe have the levels vary for different products or different sectors or different organizations? And then find a way to measure how far towards a level an organization may be or a website may be. The next working draft, which is expected in the next month or two, will probably have more than one option to try to gauge some feedback from the public. Just to give an example of what some of these outcomes look like, here's the headings guideline, and the headings guideline reads, use sections, headings, and subheadings to organize content. And then there's 3 outcomes sitting underneath that. The first one is organize content into logical blocks with headings relevant to the subsequent content. This makes locating and navigating information easier and faster. You'll notice the language here is less jargony, far less jargony than what WCAG 2 has. And it also highlights the benefit. It's not just you need to have this goal. It's this is who benefits from that. The second outcome is use visually distinct headings for sighted readers can determine the structure. And the third outcome is provide semantic structure that conveys this hierarchy to help explore and navigate the content. So these are highlighting for benefits for sighted users to have clear structure, and second, users of assistive technology who may need to have those things expressed in a new way. One of the biggest developments that has come in WCAG 3 this last year, and what I'm going to spend a good chunk more time on, is a concept called assertions and procedures. And this is our hope and our attempt to kind of bridge the gap and test the untestable. So I got to talk a little bit about some drawbacks of WCAG 2. WCAG 2 has worked really well for easy to define user needs. Things like, does this text describe this image? Does this video have captions? Is the heading marked up as heading? These are really well-defined things. And WCAG 2 has lots of these. What it doesn't really have is things like, is the language clear? Is the interfaces, are they not cluttered? Is there sufficient help available? These are things that are much more difficult to define, much more difficult to test, to be sure that it has been done, and pretty difficult to test consistently. So you don't want a thing put into a law that says have clear language, because what is clear? Who decides what is clear? The context of these things are difficult. So WCAG 2 has struggled with this, and with WCAG 3, we're trying to do better. The thing to keep in mind is WCAG never guarantees accessibility. It sets a baseline for you, but we think with WCAG 3, we can do better, and this has been our answer to that. So let's talk about procedures. So accessibility procedures are documented steps known to help improve accessibility. Examples of that are a maturity model, which an organization may follow certain practices to end up producing accessible content, like testing regularly, using accessibility tools, hiring people with disabilities, involving people with disabilities in your design process. Another one here is accessibility-focused usability testing. If you do that, we know your accessibility is going to get better. The difficulty is, and what WCAG 2 has been struggling with, it's hard to know that that's been done. I cannot look at your site and see that it was tested. I don't know how often you test it. But these procedures help. And the second part of this is the assertions. Next slide, please. And where assertions are, these are claims. These are published claims that a certain procedure has been followed. So this is the direction we're thinking of testing the untestable in WCAG 3. We'll ask organizations to publish these assertions, which may include a person or organization who's accountable that a certain process was followed, a description of that procedure, the scope, what was actually involved and what wasn't, and then a method of contacting to ask for more information. And with these procedures and assertions, we hope to address these user needs that have been challenging to define. We can check and we know these things help. So tell us that you've done that, and that's our way to make sure that these user needs are covered. It provides a more flexible way of achieving certain outcomes, and it creates some accessibility. It creates some transparency about your efforts that you've put into accessibility. So the thing to highlight is that this isn't going to replace traditional accessibility testing. You will still be checking text alternatives for images for a while, but this can be added to that and provides a new idea and a new way that we can improve on accessibility. There's a lot of open questions on this, and the working group is looking for feedback in the next draft on this as well. It's what makes a good procedure. It's who can write procedures. How much documentation do you actually require of organizations? Things like that. There's a lot to be worked out still, but this looks like a promising direction to really move WCAG 3 forward. So I want to talk a little bit about the timeline for WCAG 3 as well, because this always comes up. The focus for WCAG 3 right now for the next, what's called a W3C in a charter, is a 2-year charter that starts this year and ends in 2025. The focus there is really going to be to finalize these foundational pieces. We've been working for a number of years to try to figure out what are all of the things we want. And this next charter, these next 2 years are going to be focused on figuring out some promising solutions to these problems. So it is things like, how do we do scoring and metrics in WCAG so that an organization isn't just, I didn't pass the level, it's how close to that level are you? There's been a lot of talk about mixed responsibilities. How do you balance the responsibility that a platform owner has versus the users that publish things on a platform? Like if the US government publishes a video on YouTube, who's responsible? How do you figure that out? These are some questions that we've been thinking about. That also relates to browsers, to content management systems. The web is no longer a place that one page has one owner and they are responsible for it. It's more complex, and we're trying to figure out how to maybe find a better way to handle that responsibility. We need to figure out a way to make WCAG 3 future-proof as well. There's a lot of things happening with machine learning and AI, which potentially can uproot and drastically change how accessibility works 10 years from now. And we want to figure out a way to make WCAG 3 robust enough that it can handle these things. The thing about that is, after 2025, we don't know yet. Our goal for now is to figure out answers to these pieces and exactly how we are going to figure how we get this to a final recommendation, whether or not it's one big document, whether or not we break it up in certain ways, that is yet to be decided. So I don't have a timeline for WCAG 3 just yet, but this is as far as the timeline exists. That there's a good number of challenges. I need to watch out for time, so I'm going to skip this slide. So the future of WCAG 2 is going to be relevant for a good long time. Even if WCAG 3 gets published in, let's say, 2027, WCAG 2 is going to be relevant for a long time after that. And the W3C is setting up a task force for maintenance of WCAG 2. Melanie mentioned the many open issues right now. That's going to be continued to work on. And let's go to my last slide to highlight, please get involved. WCAG 3 doesn't have too many people working on it. It's a fairly good big group, but it's also can use your input. So the way to help, you can review the draft. There's w3.org/dr/WCAG-3.0. You can open issues on github.com/w3c/silver/issues, and you can join the community group if you have time available. Please come help. w3.org/community/silver is the place to go for that. And that, I think, is me. Let's see what questions we have, Phil.
Perfect. Thank you. Great timing. Thank you, Wilco. Thank you, Melanie. Well, the activity on chat and the Q&A is fantastic. Folks, you got 2 for the price of 1 today, 2 presentation. So we're looking, what's right around the corner with 2.2, what's a good bit further down the road with 3. Awesome stuff. So, many of the ideas I'm seeing here, things are like, love to see more easily understood language to explain requirements. That's a big thumbs up. But I've tagged quite a few questions. So without, let's go right to it. A few people were asking, does 338 and 339, does this mean CAPTCHA or reCAPTCHA will go away?
No, it does not. One thing to note about CAPTCHA is that this is only covering CAPTCHA that is involved in an authentication process, which is not all the uses of CAPTCHA. But with AA, the reCAPTCHA is still allowed. We're looking at the portion of it where you can select common objects. That type of thing will still be allowed. The transcribing, the wavy letters and numbers, not allowed under either of those success criterion. Wilco, anything to add to that?
No, that sounds about right. Yeah, CAPTCHAs are still a thing, I'm afraid.
Thank you. How do you test target size minimum on mobile? It seems like it's hard to measure the pixel for mobile. Yes. All within the scope of this solutioning.
That's a very good question. I'm not sure we've sorted that yet.
Great question. People want to hear a little bit more about this removal of 4.1.1 parsing or the deprecation. Is it really going to be considered 100% obsolete?
That is very much the intent, yes. 4.1.1 is really not useful anymore. Browsers and standards have solved the problems that 4.1.1 was designed to cover. So how exactly the W3C ends up deciding to deal with it in the standard, that's an ongoing conversation. What is pretty much certain is that you should stop filling it. 4.1.1 it's producing a lot of noise, and it is costing a lot of developers a lot of time that they shouldn't be spending on that stuff. It's not an accessibility problem anymore.
Thank you. Could you please expand on how 2.5.7 dragging movements applies to touchscreen devices? Does it affect does this mean standard swiping behavior? And there's a related one here. Let's see if I can locate that. Yeah, and can you explain how the dragging movements criterion relates to keyboard? How is it? They're suggesting it might be redundant. In the example you provided, it looks like the drag and drop feature was made accessible by allowing it to be keyboard accessible. So looking for some clarity on the dragging movements.
So dragging and keyboard are 2 separate concepts. Anything that requires a dragging operation must already be made keyboard accessible with 2.1.1 keyboard. So that's already done. But we can't expect somebody who's on their phone, let's say, and using their finger and has to do a dragging operation to go, oh, I can't do that. Let me go find a Bluetooth keyboard somewhere and plug it into my phone so that I can then do it. So this is to allow folks who are using a mouse or using their finger on a touch screen to continue to do so without having to switch over to keyboard. So that's the difference there. It's adding, it's not replacing the need for the keyboard accessibility. And there was a question about swiping. So in dragging, there is a definition for dragging, which involves pushing down on something. So with your mouse or with your finger, holding it down while you move the thing to another place and releasing. And that thing or some kind of representation of that thing is moving with the pointer. And so that is different from your typical swiping action. The understanding document for dragging movements does have a pretty good list of what is and what isn't dragging to help clarify that.
Perfect. Okay, next one. Based on 2.4.11, focus appearance. Question is enlarging an element relative to the adjacent element, say a 1.5 factor of enlarging a button upon focus, will that be sufficient? Will that be meeting the requirement?
Typically, yes. Wilco, do you agree with that?
I think so, yes.
That's
yes,
been in play.
Could.
Yeah.
It is not the best way to do this. By all means, don't hide your focus indicator and just make the button bigger. That it's going to trip people up. Technically, it would pass.
Yeah. Great. And do you guys expect there will ever be a WCAG guide for mobile apps?
So there's a task force working right now called WCAG to ICT, and their goal is to map all of the web content accessibility guidelines to non-web technologies, including native mobile, among others. So it's going to be a guidance document, not normative guidance, but that should help folks be able to map web accessibility guidelines to non-web, including mobile.
And to be clear, WCAG to ICT is already out there. What they're working on now is an update to WCAG 2.1 and 2.2.
Thank you. Will procedures and assertions that you mentioned, Wilco, are they essentially going to eliminate the VPAT? Is that part of the intent?
No, I don't think they would. It's very hard to say at this point. We are pretty early in these conversations. This looked like a promising direction, but how exactly that fits in with other things, that is currently unknown. We will need to do a lot more work to try to figure that out. So I don't imagine it would, but I don't know. Time will tell.
Cool. People were enjoying the visual examples that you gave, Melanie. And one question came up for focus not obscured.
Mm-hmm.
Does :focus -visible meet this? How does this apply on browsers like Safari that allow you to turn off focus state visibility in the preferences?
So focus not obscured is really about making sure that the thing with focus isn't underneath something else. So whether the focus indicator is on or off or anything really has nothing to do with focus not obscured. That's so, like my example had the cookie consent banner, which is pretty common on websites. And when it's overlapping the footer rather than underneath the footer, that's when you're going to get yourself into trouble with focus not obscured.
Right. You have the focus visible requirement already in place as a separate. Yeah, always. Yeah. One more question I think we have time for. And I appreciate all the great questions, folks. Obviously more than we can get to. Someone said, I definitely see the value of addressing outcomes rather than checking boxes, but I wonder if that would make it more difficult for people with disabilities to litigate against non-compliant companies. Thoughts?
That is certainly not the intent. That's one of the challenges, right? It's WCAG's 2 language is very precise so that it is super measurable and testable. And moving away from that even a little bit is kind of scary, because there's some challenges in what does that do in the legal system? How do things get interpreted if we go to less specific language? That's a tough challenge. It's an ongoing conversation. It is certainly nobody's intent, and that is a topic that has been discussed, and I'm sure will be discussed again. So we're keeping an eye on that for sure. We do want WCAG to have teeth.
Thank you so much, Wilco. Thank you, Melanie. And that puts us at the end of this session. A lot of great questions. I noticed in the chat, very lively, and you saw a range of beginners to experienced people. So that's what makes XCon great. And enjoy the rest of your day at XCon.
Thanks, Phil. Have a great day.
You too.